Welcome, everyone. So we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to the Libre Canada Books Mentoring Program webinar and overview of the Argentinian book market. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Today the discussion will be held in English with French interpretation. La discussion sera en anglais aujourd'hui, mais nous avons l'interprétation vers les français. Vous pouvez cliquer l'icône d'interprétation au bas de votre écran et sélectionner la langue de votre préférence. Si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas à les poser durant le webinaire. I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Paola Ronbadin. Paola is an independent consultant with over 20 years of experience who has worked with both government and private institutions and has assisted the Embassy of Canada to Argentina with numerous cultural projects of considerable dimension, like the creative industries mission carried out by Heritage Canada to Argentina in 2019. And when she was responsible for the full organization of the B2B sessions for all the companies. And before we start, I'll quickly just mention that we will have a Q&A period following the end of the presentation. So feel free to submit your questions as they come to you, and we will collect them for the Q&A session at the end. So Paola, I will now pass over the mic to you, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christy and Mariana. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you for the intro. I had one prepared, but I think we can go a little bit over that one. Basically, just to mention very quickly that my background is in business administration, technologies of education, and social innovation. And I am grateful that my professional journey allowed me to discover that passion for exploring where the culture and the arts meet social innovation, cultural development, as well as economic development and cultural diplomacy. So I would say that we just dive in, if you want, directly into the presentation. So this is the journey that I propose for today. We will begin with a general overview and then dig deeper into the creative industries. Then we will dive into the editorial specifically. And then finally, I wanted to bring other voices and other experiences. We will also conclude with a special guest that will join us towards the end of this webinar, and she will stay for the Q&A. And then at that point, I will probably ask you to also introduce yourselves and just have a little chat with our guest. So to start with, I'll put a timer on so I don't go over. Argentina has a population of 47 million and one of the highest literacy rates in Latin America. No hay plata, there is no money, is the new president's motto to put in evidence the fragile state of the economy. Government is struggling to push a shock reform right now as quickly as possible, and also tackling a 50% poverty rate. Some of the microeconomic indicators are beginning to improve, such as, for example, inflation and reserves, while GDP for this year is expected to fall. But of course, the economic crisis hits the poorer more than anyone else, and government is navigating right now a tense political and social landscape that affects, of course, also cultural industries. So the new liberal president, Milei, began his term last December, highlighting the need for urgent solutions to correct this metrics that I will show very briefly, but skyrocketing inflation, a decrease in economic activity and in real wage, a gap and the effects of a pegged exchange rate and this widening gap between the official value and the real market value of the US dollar, and then fiscal imbalance, of course, and poverty steadily on the rise since 2022. So he took office, and let's remember also, this is important, that he essentially won for personal and not partisan So that means that he has little representation in both houses. And on top of that, he laid a very ambitious agenda of reforms to deregulate the economy, and soon met resistance at Congress and judiciary. Basically, he wants to pass through an omnibus law, a mammoth law, that is the cornerstone of his reforms, a mega project that aims at modifying and liberalizing aspects like privatizing state companies, modifying pension and taxation systems, reducing public expenditure, reforming labor and some other structural policy, and also open international trade. And of course, as I mentioned before, since January, he has encountered several judicial obstacles to his reforms. Nevertheless, as initial measure to correct the fiscal and the monetary rate imbalances, there was a significant fiscal adjustment, which did achieve a positive start of the year in fiscal terms. Now, this, because it was largely due to layouts of state workers and a real drop in social assistance and in subsidies. These are measures that require probably an additional set of measures to make them sustainable over time and to keep these numbers as they are projected. So Argentina is, I really wanted to show this to say it's a balancing act. The coming months are going to be decisive for the economy and then for everything else that we're going to talk about today. So with this in mind, I'm going to dive into the presentation and talk a little bit about the creative sector and how it looks like in this southern country. So the creative economy accounts for 2.4% of the total economy. Buenos Aires is clearly the center of the economic activity, but the ecosystem that we will present now replicates and also exists locally in other cities, large cities like Rosario, Santa Fe, Córdoba, with similar components. So mapping this creative ecosystem, aside from a really important player, which is the academic sector, that does play a fundamental role, we find key actors in each vertical, like, for example, design, film, music. They count with one or sometimes more than one decentralized organizations that work towards strengthening the sector through professional development, grants, subsidies, collaboration opportunities, B2B partnerships. It is the case of the National Foundation for the Arts, MICA, which is the Marketplace for Argentine Creative Industries, the National Institute of Cinema and Visual Arts, or the National Institute of Music. While the cultural and social importance of screen industries is well recognized, the wider economic impact is sometimes less understood because it occurs in other sectors. For example, in Argentina, around 70% of expenditure occurs in the supply chain, like in professional services, in construction, textile, advertising, legal. According to a study by IDB and Netflix, it's estimated that for every $10 spent in the screen industry, another 6 to 9 are generated in that supply chain. And furthermore, this investment leads to the creation of additional jobs and also what we call industry spillover effects, like increased book sales or re-releases of out-of-print books. To complete the cultural landscape, I want to talk about the over 1,000 museums, cultural spaces, institutes, centers for performance, visual arts, design exhibits, and it's important to note that they have their own programming and that they also host local and international festivals, pretty much in every category: art, fashion, cinema, theater, and of course, books. I like to talk about these two groups because they are very important players. And the first one is the international cultural institutes. Some of them depend from government directly, like the Cultural Affairs section at the Canadian Embassy, or the Spanish Agency for Cultural Cooperation, or the Italian Institute of Culture, or the British Council. And others are international cultural institutes like Alliance Française or Goethe Institute. And they bring not just international content, but they also co-produce, they bring collaboration opportunities, exchanges, all kinds of cycles, meaning professional development, workshops, seminars, bursaries. And the other group that plays a key role are the private company foundations. They provide grants, bursaries, awards, prizes, and they do it through open calls for proposals, again, in almost every category of the cultural industries. Now let's dive deeper into the editorial sector. This sector presents, again, a rich ecosystem. Several types of library networks coexist in Argentina. There are federal networks, provincial, municipal. There are university networks, a public and a private one. There are regional networks throughout the country, and then those that are specialty ones like law, architecture, etc. And aside from the traditional libraries, I do want to mention the popular libraries. We could translate them as community libraries, and it's a sector I collaborated a lot with. Yeah, my heart is there a little bit. It's a model that was inspired, that is, inspired by Franklin's book clubs back in 1700s in Philadelphia, where libraries and reading cycles were created in small towns and in rural areas to promote reading. In Argentina, they had its first sample with a community or popular library created in a province far away from the capital of Buenos Aires back in 1866. Basically, what it was a group of individuals who inherited books and put together a community library in a donated space and run it by volunteers. And that was the beginning of a national program. The name of the program is, by short, CONABIP. So I put their logo there. Since 1870, it's a program that strengthens libraries all over the country, providing professional development, library management, legal advice. They also provide discounts to purchase titles to enrich those catalogs and reach broader audiences. Basically, it's interesting that libraries are perceived as civil society independent organizations, in this case, this kind of libraries. And they promote community development. They serve, again, semi-rural and also small cities. There is a network of around 1,500 popular libraries. They serve over 4 million users and manage over 20 million books, most of them donations, and they run a force of 30,000 volunteers approximately. In terms of publishing houses, I'll talk first about commercial publishing houses. Since the 90s, traditional Argentinian publishing houses started being acquired by foreign companies, and the market concentrated in those few multinational names that publish 2 of every 10 titles, but still hold a large volume concentration. Then there's the independent publishers. Over 300 independent publishers in Argentina that has a trend of growing the number of small publishing houses. For this group, the competitive advantage, what makes them different is, of course, design, illustration, mostly how they curate their catalogs, a very sophisticated production, and how much they invest in communication, in marketing, social media, and how they have managed to place more and more titles in bestseller lists. Many independent houses exist thanks to independent bookstores. So it's important to note how in Argentina bookstore networks go hand in hand with small editors, and sometimes they cross-fertilize or cross-pollinize. For bookstores, I will say that for large publishing houses, the bookstore channel represents 80% of sales, while for small and medium-sized companies, it's over 85%. Other channels, of course, are fairs, book clubs, digital stores. And about digital sales, it's important to note they are growing steadily as a channel, whether it is through simple ways of ordering, like order a book via WhatsApp using your smartphone, or also through online stores. And in terms of distributors, I'll mention just three types: the self-distribution, the specialized companies that outsource distribution through exclusivity agreements, and finally, companies that complement that model by upfront purchases of books from publishers, but based on orders placed by bookstores. So who else is in this map? So I want to mention chambers. We have two national chambers of commerce. Both are members of Fundación El Libro, which is the Book Foundation, which is also the organizer of the Buenos Aires International Book Fair. So the first one, the Argentine Chamber of Books, CAL, Cámara Argentina del Libro, focuses on publishing. This one. They gather over 450 small, medium-sized publishing houses, whereas the other one, CAP, which is the Argentine Chamber of Publications, La Cámara Argentina de Publicaciones, they have about 60 members, bookstore chains, publishing companies, mostly foreign-owned. And what's important is to know that they are the ones who manage the country ISBN register, and they report on the state of publishing and the numbers in the country. Then some independent publishers are grouped, some are not. This is a new organization called CALI. I think they gathered formally last December, which is the Independent Bookstore Chamber. And the idea of gathering is, again, to brainstorm and try to solve things like lowering the costs of printing, of storing, of distributing, how to participate in fairs. And then it's also true that many small publishing houses are not associated at all. As I mentioned before, important players are the associations and networks. In terms of networks, I mentioned two of them. One that is for the universities that are state-run, and the other one that is the universities presses that belong to private universities. So those two coexist. And then also a couple of work about festivals. I chose Filba, which some of you might have heard about. Filba is a foundation. It's an NGO, actually, that since 2019 promotes literature in all its forms. It fosters the circulation of Latin American authors and promotes reading. They hold mainly an international flagship festival that is held at the same time in Buenos Aires in Argentina and in the capital of Uruguay, Montevideo. And it has an audience of over 10,000 attendees. Now it's in its 10th edition, and it brings together outstanding authors. It has very good local and international press coverage. And they also hold two other festivals. The Filba Foundation holds a smaller literary festival that is held in inner cities, smaller cities in Argentina. And they also have a festival dedicated to children and families. And as I chose in terms of associations, although there are many strong ones, probably the main one is the Argentine Society of Writers, La Sociedad Argentina de Escritores, which is a member-based national association that has representation and chapters all over the country, promotes and defends rights of authors, and is also co-organizer of the International Book Fair of Buenos Aires. So let's dive into the International Book Fair. I think I know already that James, who's here, will be joining. So some of you might be in attendance. So it will run now from April 25 to May 13. And it is one of the most popular book fairs in the Spanish-speaking world. The 3-week event will be visited by more than 1 million readers, more than 12,000 book professionals, and some numbers from last year's edition. There were over 300 stands, 12 countries were represented, and 14,000 publishing houses. Over 1.2 visitors attended this fair, and there were professional workshops, reading, financial support programs, and also a specific rights area where interested parties could purchase and sell publishing and translating rights. In addition to the book fair, I also wanted to mention editors' fairs that are well known in Argentina, and I'm bringing 2 examples today. One is this fair that is called Edita Fair. It's organized by the province, not the city of Buenos Aires, the provincial level. It counts with museum and university support, and the last edition from last year had over 120 publishing houses and over 8,000 visitors in only 2 days. The other one, which is the FED, Feria de Editores, it's an editor fair that occurs in the city of Buenos Aires. Last year, it had over 15,000 visitors, 250 publishers, including 40 foreign houses. They run a fellowship program that encourages participation of publishers from abroad. Last year, there were Brazil, Colombia, Germany, Italy, France, and Spain featured at the fair. And now I wanted to review a little bit consumer habits and then speak a little bit about the market. For consumer habits, a breakdown of reading by category shows that fiction and nonfiction still hold the first place, as in previous years. In terms of numbers, those who have read between 1 or 2 books per year are about 47%. Those who read at least one book are 51%. And in terms of cultural consumption by category, reading books still holds a good 51% of the total cultural good consumption. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the economic crisis is changing some of these habits. For example, the habit of purchasing books. Between January and February 2024, sales dropped 30%. Why? Well, because inflation is eating up consumers' pockets, and purchasing books is becoming a luxury item. Minimum wage salary in Argentina buys 13 books, whereas in Spain, it buys 63 books. In addition to that, higher production costs. Again, inflation is making those prices go up, and it's hitting mostly small, medium editors. High prices of paper are due to an oligopoly of two companies that control paper production in Argentina. And in Argentina, books are printed almost exclusively in paperback. So the price of paper dramatically impacts those production costs. For first edition and print reruns of 1,000 copies, paper will account for 40 to 50% of the total cost, while printing will add 30 to 40%. Inflation is also hitting when deferring royalty payments. Also, regulatory framework is potentially about to change. Again, this is happening, so we don't have the precisions right now, but a potential new regulatory framework will allow two things. On the one side, a simplified regime for importing books, but it could also hit the sector by lifting protective measures that are on right now. And again, due to economic crisis and lack of funds, the government decreased and sometimes completely stopped subsidies, grants to the editorial sector, and state or government purchases of books. A couple of numbers to give a snapshot of how it looks like. Some numbers regarding titles nationally, they have been on the rise, reaching 35,000 new titles in 2022. And from that diagram, a breakdown of by type of publisher, considering that those blue lines are carrying those totals from the slide before. And then the orange is publishing house, the gray is commercial, the yellow is small publishers, and the light blue are micro publishers, finally the green university presses. We see that as a snapshot, in general, the trend keeps pretty stable on how non-commercial publishing follows, leads the way, followed by small and micro, and finally the green of the university presses. But it's pretty stable year after year. The next slide has to do with translations. I really wanted to bring this up. Argentina has a long history of translations. Much of the recognition of its publishing houses in the Spanish-speaking countries is due to both the amount and the quality of translations. Over the past 6 years, between 60, an average of 60% of the translator titles were in English, and then followed by French, 15%. 5 to 6% of new releases are translations, and that trend has been stable for some years now. And in terms of genres, it's fiction and nonfiction and social sciences that have a prominent place. Now, in terms of opportunities, Argentina is the fourth exporter after Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. Although Spain continues to be the main place of content creation for audio content, Latin America grew a lot in 2023. It grew 30+%. And within Latin America, Argentina grew 24.8%, followed by Mexico and Colombia. In terms of children and young adults titles, they fall mostly within the commercial publishing sector. It is a growing market. It has over 60 publishers, and it is achieving good retail prices, although in spite of those high production costs that we mentioned before. Argentine publishers are open and willing to put in place innovative collaboration strategies. They're very open to creating subsidiaries, agreements with distributors, print on demand, and other models. And finally, bringing back that slide from before, which talks about that rich tradition and quality of translation, which is also an asset and an opportunity. Before diving into regulatory framework, I wanted to just show a quick example of the Illustrators Association of Argentina. They created an online catalog that I invite you to take a peek at. Very beautiful. And they give publishers and agents a digital platform so that editors and distributors can browse production and content creators directly to buy editorial rights. Now let's discuss regulatory framework, because it's going through a time of potential changes. As I mentioned before, Argentina had in place a very strong public policy for the protection of the editorial industry and the promotion of reading. The set of protectionist laws are now being challenged by the government due to the economic restrictions that we presented at the beginning. And most of the sector's players are opposing them. Basically, what could change is that back in 2001, the fixed price law was passed. It establishes that the publisher must set the retail price of a title, or the distributor in case of an imported book. Prices are the same at every point of sale. And in Argentina, books are exempt from value-added tax at all stages of production, except in the case of bookstores, which are not exempt. This could dramatically change. And although, as I said before, most players are against these changes, so against liberating the editorial market, some of them are in favor, and I wanted to bring forward the arguments of each side. So in favor, those in favor argue that each bookstore will set prices for their own commercial strategy. They will set a strategy and prices accordingly. That setting prices independently, the booksellers will be able to seek a very specific audience and set their own profit margins, and that they will also be able to use promotions like Father's Day or Christmas and events as marketing tools, and that Argentina would also line up with other international practices, like is the case of Brazil. Now, those who oppose, they argue that the laws are there to protect small players against the power of large ones. And a few big conglomerates could destroy the rich, smaller cultural components, like that editorial ecosystem that is so diverse. That then large digital platforms could grow and become a menace for for those independent bookstores. And if we have less and less independent bookstores, there's the associated risk of also losing small publishing houses. And there's also a fear that if liberated, the market pressures will tend to push for consolidation of efficient big players over quality and diversity. So this is the scenario we're dealing with. As I said before, government support is on hold for 2024, but if you go online, you will find in the page of the Argentine Agency for Investment and International Trade, which is the agency that puts in place the policies to support internationalization, you will find that they finance and manage national stands at book fairs, and they organize international meetings. And I will show two of the programs, the Argentina Key Titles and the Programa Sur. The Argentina Key Titles is a program that is basically a selection of titles to interest foreign language publishers. Each title is added to a digital catalog with a translated review and an excerpt, so to encourage buyers. And these titles then are also available in print at international book fairs. The second one, which is the Programa Sur, has been the country's most emblematic internationalization program. It financed translations in a very simple and flexible way, and it used to be a model in the region. The program funded up to 150 titles a year, and even foreign publishers could apply for translation support once they had purchased the translation rights. But in this year, at the beginning of the year, the program reduced its budget to 10%, not in 10%, but to just 10% of what it was assigned in 2023. This will have a direct impact on supporting selling those translation rights, and it will also have an indirect impact in terms of other translation rights, those with no subsidy. And of course, it will spill over to series and movie rights. So I wanted to bring those two programs and the state of them to you today. And then for the last part of today's journey, I thought of introducing other voices and other experiences that might be useful in terms of insights and also in terms of benchmarks to get to know better the Argentine editorial market. First, I want to introduce Carolina Testa. She is a cultural manager based in Toronto and in Buenos Aires. She created a cycle called Inspiradas, a cultural online project that promotes Hispanic American literature in Canada. And she will be present at this year's International Book Fair, and I'm happy to arrange a meeting if you want to meet her. I asked her to share her thoughts about the editorial market today, and these are her words. So the quote goes here. In the past, Argentina has been through numerous crises, and literary production has always worked as the outlet that kept the cultural and intellectual ecosystem alive, strong, and sustainable through tough times. We have lived every crisis as potential opportunity to explore new themes and conversations, seek international markets for alternatives, and develop our rich translation trajectory. Buenos Aires is still one of the top 3 cities with more bookstores in the world. Many of these have also transitioned into small publishing houses, opening doors to new markets and new authors. Argentina ultimately will always be invested in literature, no matter what. An area of growth in Argentina is clearly the digital market. The country is undergoing an expansion phase of audiobook and ebook production. Communication is led by booktubers that have managed to gain a key role in the literary promotional landscape. The example is the audiobook, or actually the podcast, I should say, Por qué leer, that translates as Why Reading, from Cecilia Bona, which is currently Spotify's #1 podcast in the country, and that I follow. As a second example, I wanted to bring the case of Carolina Orloff. She is an Argentine publisher and translator based in Edinburgh. Although the example is really not related to Canada specifically, with Carolina, we thought it was interesting, bringing it forward as a working model worth exploring. So Orloff's goal is to enable access to talented authors of Latin American literature in quality English translations, and she certainly managed by getting several of her published authors on Booker Prize longlist. So in her own words, Charco, which is Charco Press, Charco stands for puddle, focuses on finding outstanding contemporary Latin American literature. We aim to act as a cultural and linguistic bridge. It is an exciting time to be discovering and reading Latin American literature, given the vast and rich array of works coming out of this region, the diversity of voices. We actively seek out those authors that are exemplary, thought-provoking. We also consider our translators to be a critical part of the equation. It is their interpretation, their attention to the nuances that make the difference. We select contemporary and quality translators. So we thought it was interesting, not just focusing on curating those authors, but also curating those translations. And then I should also add that if you go to the link, you will see how they also invest a lot in design, illustration, and an amazing marketing strategy. And then I'm going to ask Mariana, because I cannot see if I can see. I don't know if Gabriela already joined us.
Yes, she has.
She has. Okay, great. Then it's time to introduce her. So this is dessert for us. I am more than pleased to introduce the expert voice of Gabriela Adamo, who was kind enough to join us today. Hola, Gaby.
Hola, hi, hello, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here. I will quickly introduce Gabriela before asking her some questions. And then, of course, I invite you to join us in conversation and shoot questions as well. Gabriela is an Argentine translator and editor based in Buenos Aires. She founded the literary program at Fundación TIPA and served as the executive director for the Buenos Aires International Book Fair, which she left to run Fundación Filba, the private foundation I mentioned to you before that is dedicated to the organization of literary festivals and literary promotion in South America. And she currently teaches at a university in Argentina. So, Gaby, our first question to you had to do with the social landscape, which I presented at the beginning today, because it does affect everything that happens in Argentina and, of course, the cultural industries. So with the economic and social landscape that looks so challenging right now, also for the editorial sector, but also considering the historical strengths of the Argentinian sector, Do you identify opportunities in the not immediate but mid long term that you would like to share with us?
Well, hi, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I don't know how long you've already been listening to people talking, so I'm going to be brief, and please feel free to just hop in, interrupt, ask questions, because I think the good thing of having me here live is that I can answer particular questions if they arise. I don't know, I'm not sure how much time we have, Paola, anyway, so let me know about that.
I think we have 20 nice minutes, right, Mariana?
Okay, then just going briefly, I mean, I think this question has been answered by the examples you just gave before. Argentina is a country used to crisis, so I'm not going to speak a lot about yet another one. Just let me stress that this government seems like especially keen on cutting all kinds of support on culture here, support and whatever support there is for universities, for schools, for libraries, of course, for publishers and booksellers. The successful Prosur program, which I think you just saw a minutes ago, is under, no one knows if it's gonna still exist. It will exist, but how? So, well, that's really quite dramatic for us. But on the other hand, those supports were never that big. And our publishing houses and booksellers are used to cope and work around all these problems. So we hope this will still be so. And the other thing is that culture seems to bloom during this crisis in Latin America and in Argentina specifically. And you can see that today publishers and booksellers are very active, meeting and putting up fun projects and interesting projects and intelligent projects to counterweight all this quite bleak scenario you have out there. So as for the opportunities themselves, well, I guess you've talked about this already, but direct export of books in French or English is like a very, very little business you can do with us. There are a few booksellers who do have like a very limited selections of books in other languages, and that could be an option. But then the most interesting thing is to sell rights to Argentinian publishers. As it has been said already, our publishing houses translate a lot, much more than the US for sure, in proportion. And we have a lot of houses, small houses, but very professional, I have to say last year, or was it this year? I know it was last year. I was at the AWP, the Writers' Conference in the US, which was told to me that it had like one of the best independent presses, independent book publishers fair attached to it. And I was there and I was like very disappointed. The design, the production, all that came around those really smaller publishers is very different to what we understand. Our independent publishers are professional publishers, so it's worth working with them, number one. And I can name a long list. We have Chai, we have Eterna, Cadencia, Sigilo, La Bestia Equilatera, Fiordo, Godot, and I could go on. All those publishers do export their books to the whole of Latin America. So if you get your rights sold in Argentina and published in Argentina, those books will be available in Latin America and in Spain too, and in the US too, sold in Spanish. Also, authors are very well taken care of. All that is publicity and communication and invitations to festivals and book fairs and wherever is like works really well. But one thing you should be aware of is that if you're looking for big contracts, then you should look to Spain. You probably know that more or less 80% of the market in Spanish is held by two publishing houses, Planeta and Penguin Random House Mondadori. So if all the big contracts are, and those they take the decisions in Barcelona. So if you are thinking of selling one of those big bestsellers, just head straight ahead to Barcelona. But if you have smaller books, then you may well consider Argentina or Chile or Colombia. It's not only Argentina. We do work well with those books. Or you may also consider, and I don't know if you talked about this, splitting rights.
No, I haven't.
Splitting rights, I think, is a very important strategy because that a book gets published in Spain doesn't guarantee that it will cross the Atlantic. There are high chances that especially if it's not a big bestseller. If it is a big bestseller, of course, it will be everywhere available. But for smaller books, even if they have their branches in all major capitals in Latin America, they won't, it's too much trouble for them. So they will only have the book available in Spain. So a good idea is to either split rights and have one publisher for Spain and one for Latin America, or directly go with a Latin American publisher who will do whatever he or she can to get their books to Spain, because it is an important part for their market. There are some questions down there, and I'm very happy to just stop and try and answer that. What about agencies in Argentina? Yeah, great questions. There are no agencies in Argentina.
No.
There was one, and they moved to Spain. So you have to do the work. There are two options. Either you work with an agency in Spain, a sub-agent to sell your books, or you have to do the work directly. And that was going to be my, like, if there's one recommendation I would do to sell rights to Argentina, and maybe not, I mean, and you can meet the whole of the Southern Cone. The one suggestion would be to travel, to take the long trip, because we are exactly at the opposite side of the continent, as you know, and meet publishers here in Argentina. Preferably, I would do it when there is one of the two big book fairs that happen in Argentina. One is the Buenos Aires, La Feria Internacional del Libro de Buenos Aires, the big official one, which, have you been in Guadalajara? The Guadalajara Book Fair? But it's like a similar, it's like a very big fair. It lasts a month. It's like 1 million people go and visit it. It's like a huge bookstore. The publishers sell their books directly to the public, but you have at the beginning a few days which are only for professionals. And those are the days I recommend. And there you will meet publishers from the whole continent. So you come to that fair and you don't only meet Argentinian publishers, but also from other countries. And the other option is FED, the Feria de Editores Independientes, which is held, the first one is held now in April. So it starts next week. So you should plan for next year. And the FED is held in August. FED is smaller, and it's an independent booksellers, book publishers fair. It's great. As a reader, I love that fair. I actually love it more than the other one. But I think for publishers, the traditional book fair, especially if it's your first time coming to Argentina, the traditional one is a better option. At this, if it would have been in another context, I would have said you can meet those publishers in Guadalajara, or you can meet those publishers in Frankfurt in the book fair, not in London. The London Book Fair is not in our map, not for any specifically reason, just
another circuit.
Yeah, it's there. Those fairs are very expensive for our publishers, so they can't be in all of them. And traditionally, there have been in Frankfurt, there has been support for traveling to Frankfurt and, of course, Guadalajara. So it's there where you can find them. Given the context we have now, you will probably not find them anywhere this year at least. So I think a trip to Argentina, definitely it's worth it. And yeah, no, sorry about the agents, but they don't exist. There
That
was
was
something
great
else,
because you
right?
you kind of also answered the second one, Gabi.
Yes, I know, I did it. I'm trying to check. I think there were, I don't know, was there some here the agent question is longer. Is
Yes.
scouting, would you recommend this as an entry point to Argentina? Scouting, yes. And okay, and the fair. Yes. Well, scouting, we don't have, our publishers don't have scouts in the sense you do have them in Europe. But scouts often, and there are two things to keep in mind. Scouts often are like two-sided agents, right? They will be scouting for the publishers who hire them in Europe or in the US or in Canada. But since they know that much about the countries they work with, they can also work the other way around. So I think that would be a great idea. If you have a scout you work with and you trust and you can work with well, why not give it a try and see if that scout can mediate sort of with the Argentinian market or help you tailor, because you if you experience the publishers, you know about that. The most important thing is to find the right match, the right publisher for your catalog. So scouts can help you with that. They will know about Argentinian publishers and tell you, well, yes, you should get in touch with them and them and them. So that's a good idea. And the other mediators are the translators. Translators are great communicators. They come and go, and here we are very used, I don't know how it works in Canada, but here we are very used to translators pitching the books they want to translate and going. And if they fall in love with a book, they will go publisher by publisher trying to get that book translated. So they are good intermediates too. And what else I have here? Well, I have several notes I took. I could keep sharing with you, but yeah, here's another question.
Speaking about
Yes.
translation, do Argentinian readers respond well to more international Spanish translations, or is it an adaptation of Argentinian Spanish necessary?
Well, this is a long-standing debate, which I think is reaching a good port right now. For ages, we've had the very Spanish translations done in Madrid with a very heavy Madrilean accent. And I have to say, Latin American readers learned to cope with them, and they had no problem in reading those translations. It was not the same the other way around. When we started doing translations, Spanish readers were like, hey, what is this? I can't read this, no? So there started a long debate around so-called neutral Spanish, which of course doesn't exist. But there is something, especially in Mexico and in Argentina, who have this very long-standing traditions as translators. We did work, and we still work for a long time with different kind of neutralities. The most important one is if you speak Spanish. I don't know how much into detail to get, but the vos and tú issue, Rio de la Plata, the Southern Cone Spanish has some very particular inflections, and we have learned to both read without those inflections and translate our books without those inflections. So our books can be perfectly read all over the Spanish world and vice versa. And also, along the last years, Spanish readers and also Spanish publishers and Spanish critics have become much more open to our translations. It has, I think it's something, a trend that is happening in the North too, where diversity is being perceived in a different way, and what was like something that would leave you outside before now is seen as well. It's different riches to the Spanish language. So that's not a problem. And no, there are no specific editions or adaptations of a translations. Once you have a translation, that's a
You're
one.
good to go. Yeah. There's another one, Gabi. I'll read it from the chat. Are there any themes Argentinian readers are interested in? That is, certain stories or genres that are popular?
That's a good question, and always difficult to answer, because it's like this word I learned in English is silos for readers. No, it's something we tend to not like very much. I would, yeah. Argentinian readers are very varied.
Diverse.
Also, yeah, very diverse. All sorts of books we have houses specialists in romantic literature, and then we have like very sophisticated translators of high quality literatures. We are very keen readers of nonfiction in all its variety, from journalistic nonfiction to academic essays, if the subjects are more or less of interest for us. We can read all kinds of books. So also, now there's like a new boom with short stories, which for a long time were something that was like out of the question. Now we, of course, novels are always a little bit easier to market than short stories, but they are working too. What I think could be an interest. Sorry, just thing, and yeah. What I think could be, I don't know if any of you work with this, but everything that has to do with native population and original populations is we are starting to paying attention to it very late. We come late to that interest in regard to the rest of the world, but there is starting to be a very strong interest for that. So, and I know Canada has been like very pioneering in that sense. So those kind of stories, and also not only fiction or fiction by Native Canadian authors, or essays about the subject, historical essays about the subject, those could be something original and different to offer to Argentinian publishers. And yes, Paola, sorry.
No, it was bifolded. So that was one, because it is something important in Canada. It is on the agenda. And also that I have the sense that Argentinians are very keen on reading foreign authors. That is a constant, and perhaps I don't know if you've seen a change over the years, but for me, it's always been there, that interest of having not just the bestsellers of every country, but also like digging into, especially Canada, that is perhaps less well known in the Argentinian scene than other countries. I find Argentinians are good readers that way, that they are curious readers.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are very cosmopolitan readers. That would be the word to put it. And yeah, what wouldn't work is if there is a story, which I've heard so many times pitched at me. Oh, there is a Canadian author writing about an Argentinian who goes to Buenos Aires and lives with the gauchos in the Pampa. We don't want someone from Canada to come and write about that. But the other way around, yes, we are curious. We want to know. We want to know what's happening now, and well, and also the craftsmanship, the good writing, right? Especially these houses I mentioned, who are quite exquisite in their choices. So if you have even experimental writing, those are welcome here.
Mhm.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions. I'm afraid I have to wrap this session up, but I'd like to thank Paola and Gabriela as well for sharing all their
Can I
knowledge.
Sorry.
Yes, yes.
briefly say just two things? I'm going to send Paola a report I wrote last year for the British Council about Latin American publishing markets. I think they can be useful for you.
Mhm.
And then you were mentioning people in Canada who could be good reference. Did you mention Ingrid Becherman? Ingrid Becherman is the person in charge of the Spanish-speaking program at MET, Blue Met Festival in Montreal. She travels to Buenos Aires a lot, and she's always carrying books with her. So she would be a great ambassador also,
Absolutely.
I think, someone to have in there.
Yeah.
And that's it. Ready to
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yes.
I'm sure all the participants appreciate that. So I'll ask Paula later, and we maybe can compile everything in an email for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
And if there are any questions that were unanswered, or if anyone has questions they are saving up for later, you can bring them up in your meetings with Paula, or just send them in an email to me, and I'll make sure to forward it to them. So thank you so much, Paula and Gabriela, for sharing all your experience and the knowledge of the Argentinian book market. And I would like to thank the Canada Book Fund as well, the component of the Government of Canada, for their financial support in this event, and all the participants for joining. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.